It's coming along, but it's not completely soaked up yet, and that's good because if it's a little stiff, there's a chance that I'll be able to thin it. Once it's really, really floppy and loose, it's going to be harder to thin it out, like with a sharp scraper or something. And I would have chosen thinner rawhide had I had it in the first place. So I think what I'm going to do is cut out a piece that's close to the size I want, and then I'm going to put it on the beam and try to thin it out, and then once that's done, it should soak up pretty fast. This part is close to about what I want, but that's the only part. So the rest of it we're going to have to try to thin down. That may be challenging, but we'll see what we can do. I'll sharpen a knife or something really sharp, and then I'll take a hard piece of metal and I'll turn the edge, the sharp edge, over at an angle like this. Now anything hard and smooth should be able to turn this edge the way we want it. It's an old tanning technique that's used for thinning hides, mostly finished leather, and also the Northern Indians use it for dry scraping and freeze scraping moose hides. So what I'm going to do is take this hard object and I'm going to run it along the edge, just kind of starting at about the same angle it's sharpened at, which is pretty high, about like that. And then I'm just going to tip it a little bit and do that again, maybe once or twice. But I can do this while I'm working too. So what this does is, instead of presenting the sharp edge to the hide at a right angle like this, the edge is actually curled under, like right this way. So it doesn't gouge and cut and slice into the hide as much. It actually kind of, it's like having, imagine my fingers on the bottom there are the edge, and it controls how deep the cut goes. So you have a way more control than you do just kind of trying to scrape stuff off with scraping at a right angle, and it's more of a slicing action. So you get more of a slicing action, but you also have control. That's kind of the theory. So let's go see if it works. Okay, this is what I'm after right here. You see those? These are deep, thick shavings. Substantial amounts of skin. I feel like I don't have quite enough of a burr, so I'm gonna try to turn it a little bit further over. Again, if this was something I did regularly, you know, I'd know what I needed to do. But usually, like I said, this is actually done on the skins after they're tanned. The only reason it's working on this is because this is still has kind of a leathery, not completely soaked up texture. Yeah, okay, that's working better. Each stroke is taking off quite a bit now. Of course, all you woodworkers out there are already familiar with this concept from wood scrapers. Now, if you're doing this at home, you could save all of this to make glue. This would make excellent glue. I hope you've noticed that you're going to see a lot of things here that you don't see anywhere else. And, you know, these things that I'm putting out are going to influence what other people do in the long run. And you'll start seeing this stuff show up elsewhere. And hopefully I'll get some credit for that, but I probably won't a lot of the time. Because half of what the internet is people running around collecting stuff that someone else has already done formulating something like a 5th grade book report and then presenting it as if they know what the hell they're talking about. Which annoys me to no end as an information consumer, to go around and just find all these 5th grade book reports everywhere when I'm trying to find some substantial information. And I just find the same crap repeated over and over again. Now you can thin leather this way, but it's typically done with a special shaped tool that's turned with a turned burr like this after the leather's tanned and on a perfectly flat surface. And the point is to shave the leather to a perfectly even thickness. And that's called a currier's knife. The currying and tanning were often separate professions, and the currier was the guy who took the wet leather out of the pits and then finished it. And often his business was just in a completely different place. With small tanneries and small operations, they were often under the same roof, even by the same people. But typically they were different professions. One was to get the leather tanned and through the whole tanning process, and the other guy did the dyeing, oiling, thinning, softening, any of that kind of stuff that went on. Okay, this is feeling really good now, so I think we got it. And in a minute we'll go back inside and get to work on this. Also, since I scraped this so much, it's really open now, and it's going to take up water much faster. So that's another trick you can use to get your skin soaked up quickly if it's being a little bit recalcitrant. And the reason is that you can see how it's stretching the fibers open, and then the water is going to be able to just move right in there. Very powerful technique for getting hides re-soaked, especially for a home tanner. Like in the old days, they'd have, you know, running creeks and machinery like big hammers, wooden hammers that would just pound the hides in water until they were soaked back up. I'm just going to pick all these scraps up to make a quick batch of glue just to show you, and we're going to go back and finish this thing up. So these are all the scraps I scraped off. As you can see, that's quite a bit of skin there. And I'm going to go ahead and cook this up into glue. And of course, if you prepare rawhide, you can always just cut off pieces of the skin and cook those up for your glue. I'm going to just cover that with water. Alright, now it should really soak up easy. Just a little bit of stretching, some warm water. I want to get it completely soaked up, and then I'll probably actually try to take some water back out of it to get it to an even moisture content, not too soggy. Looking good. These are the Ginger scissors that are in my Amazon store. Regular scissors are not like this. Now remember, this is going to stretch a bit, and you want it to stretch, so you cut it just a little bit short. But you don't want it to have to pull so hard that you're going to tear stitches or tear your sinew. That's good, I think. And we have to accommodate this curve right here. Just copy that on the other side. Okay, we got a good fit here. I trimmed this at a slight angle because the head comes down at an angle. As long as it's still wet, you can really squish it around where you want, but it's good to have a good fit in the first place. And then back here, everything meets up really well if I just pull on it a little bit. And then it comes right together, so hopefully. We're going to find out here real quick. So we look in my buckskin book here, there's a stitch called the subcutaneous stitch, and that's what we're going to use. It's kind of an odd stitch. It goes kind of back and forth, but it's completely hidden. So there's no stitching exposed when you're finished. And this rawhide is thick enough to use this stitch, so that's the stitch I'm going to try to use. We'll see. And I like to use this on sewing leather, especially brain tanned buckskin. It makes a really cool hidden seam where you can't see any of the thread. Okay, now I'm going to draw the stitch that I'm going to use so that you understand what I'm doing. So that's our rawhide. We're going to come at the top edge of the outside of the rawhide and stab the needle in here, or even up here on the surface a little bit. Then the stitch goes underneath. I'm going to draw it a little big here. It goes underneath the skin, through the skin fiber, and then it pops up again here. Then it goes over here, and it starts at the same place, usually actually the same hole that this original thread was in. Okay, so then we're going to go underneath, mining underneath the leather, pop out here, then we come back across to the same hole, and then out here, and then back here, under the skin, out here, back here. Now when you pull that tight, this is what it looks like. Well, this section right here. There's no thread exposed at all. And since we stabbed in here up on the surface or right at the corner, it pulls the surface of the leather down like that underneath, so you can't see the edge of the rawhide either. It's really cool, and it makes this nice little zigzag design. So in order to do this, I need this sharp 3-cornered needle. It'd be pretty hard to do it without this. I'm using this and the thimble, and the thimble is pretty crucial because you can't really, it's pretty tough and it's really hard to push this needle, even though it's sharp, through this rawhide. So that's what I'm using. And when you buy these Glover's needles, you can buy them in sets, and they come in different sizes. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what size this is, but this is the right size for this job for sure. Okay, so let's get started. Now out of these sinew threads, I'm going to pick the biggest, thickest one because I think I can get away with it, and it's just going to be that much stronger. I tie a knot in here. This is going to be a figure 8 knot just because it'll hold a little bit better than an overhand knot. Now remember, I got this rawhide a little bit dry. That's because I don't want it so soggy that every time I pull the sinew through it, it's going to get soggy wet, because I want this to stay a little bit dry in the way it is. It's kind of got some body to it. If it gets really wet, it's going to get weaker, it's going to stretch, and it's going to unravel. It's just not going to be good. Now, I'm doing this the best right way. It's going to make the best result, I think. And you know, you don't have to do it that way. The other one I did recently, I just did a whip stitch with a thin piece of sinew. But since this has a thick enough body to it that I can get in there and make a real subcutaneous stitch, so all the stitches are hidden, it's just going to make a better product. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't much care for this thimble. It's round and my finger isn't round, so let's fix that. That's way better. I'm gonna have to pay attention to my work more than to whether you can see what I'm doing. That's just how it's gotta be here. So with the first stitch again, I'm gonna go in right at the corner right here, and then through the skin itself, and then pop out over here, and then I'll go back to that hole. And I'm probably going to go for about a 1/4 inch, or a little less is kind of what I'd like to shoot for, is less than 1/4 of an inch for each of these stitches that goes through the skin. Okay, so now I'm not going to pull this tight yet because I still need to slip it on. I'm just going to do a little section to get everything started, then slip it on, then I'll finish it on there. That's the plan anyway. Okay, so Stab in that hole or near it. Go through the skin a little ways. Okay, that's about, yeah, I guess what I'm shooting for is 3/16. But make sure that I'm coming out up here on the surface or right at the corner there. This is such a cool stitch. And this comes from, well, I mean, I think it's used in a lot of different places. It's used in surgery to do sutures. But the Germans and Swiss use it for making sewing with oil tanned leather, which is similar to brain tanned buckskin for making like lederhosen. I've used it for seams in buckskin, making nicer, fancier stuff. Let me just warn you, watch out for these Glover's needles. They are wicked. They will mess you up. They're made for piercing skin, and they will pierce yours just as easily, if not easier. I'm going to pick up a little speed here. I'm just getting my bearings. Everything's going great so far, as long as none of these rip out when I tighten them up. That could definitely happen. I'm trying to make sure that I go deep enough into the leather that they're not going to tear out easily. Okay, so this is getting real thin right here. So instead of going through the skin, I'm actually going all the way through. Instead of traveling inside the skin with the stitch, I'm going all the way through, and then I'm going to punch back out. Just for that thin spot right there. Not gonna hurt anything to do that. Okay, I think we're good. Most of it's sewn up. I can do the rest on the handle. I want this seam on the back. Uh-oh, I forgot about getting it over the hump here. I might have a problem. No, we're gonna make it. Oh yeah, we're gonna make it. No problem. We also need our glue. You can see it's like a stiff jello. And this is what happens when it cools. So when it's hot, it's totally liquid, and then when it cools, it turns into jello, just like making jello or aspic. So as soon as I heat this up, it'll go liquid. Problem is, this is cold, this is wet, so it's cold. So the glue is gonna gel underneath here, but it's going to gel, period. And when that happens, like if you're working with wood and hide glue, you want to glue stuff while it's hot and the glue's liquid, and then it gels and then it sets. But you don't want to disturb the glue when it's gelled until it's dry. So if it gels and then you break that gel up, it's not going to have the same sticking power. So what we're going to do is heat this up. We're going to get it all in here, get the thing on there, and then we'll finish lacing it up, and it's going to be all messed up. There might even be chunks of gel like underneath here. But as long as we reheat it, that glue will melt again and reflow all in there, smooth out, and then we can let it dry and glue itself down. Here's the glue that we're making out of the hide scraps that we scraped off here. And honestly, given that we don't need this to be, you know, perfect or anything, I think this is probably strong enough. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cook this for a second and cook off a little bit more moisture. That's usually considered bad form, to just like boil glue to get rid of water really quick. But again, this isn't like fine woodworking or anything. We just want something to help stick that rawhide down. Really, honestly, it's probably unnecessary to do it at all. So I'm not too worried about that. So I'm just going to boil this for just a couple minutes to get rid of a little bit more water, which will make it thicker and stronger. Okay, while that's getting ready, we're going to make a little feather brush here. So I'm just going to slice a little bit off the end of this feather, cut it about here, cut the hollow end off like that. Stick this in here. There we go. And now we have just a little disposable brush. Cut the end off, and it's adjustable. Pretty cool. Okay, that's more than enough. Again, this is going to cool really fast, like too fast to actually make a good glue joint, but we're just going to reheat it later. So all I'm really concerned about now is getting a good substantial coat. A little extra glue seeping out here and there, not a big deal. It's water soluble, it can be scraped, it can be sanded, none of that's a concern. Okay, so yeah, this glue up here is already gelled up, not a problem. If we were doing woodwork, it would be a problem. Slip it on. Okay, things are looking good here. Looking good. We're just gonna tighten these stitches up a little bit and move our way down here, then we'll have some extra thread and we can finish this up. Now this isn't super tight, and that is just fine. Because it's rawhide and it's going to shrink. Although, something you will probably not hear anywhere else, and hopefully you've come to expect that here, is that rawhide does not always shrink how you want it to, and that has to do with its age. This rawhide's a year old. I would prefer to be working with fresher rawhide. The fresher the better. Over time, something happens with the way that rawhide reacts with water, and therefore how it shrinks and how much it shrinks. Very old rawhide just does not have the same shrinking power and type of characteristics that we want and typically want in rawhide as far as its reaction behavior with water and its shrinking ability. So if you have some really old rawhide or rawhide of unknown age, could be a problem. It's something to think about. So hopefully you can see how nice and clean and flat this seam is. There's just a little bit of rise to it. And we may be able to actually compress that down a little more. This all might work just as good or better for lifting these stitches up. Now ideally I would prefer to get this slightly tighter, but you know, I have to weigh that against the time it would take me to figure that out, continually trimming this over and over to get it tight, and then getting it so tight that I'm risking breaking the rawhide or the thread and trying to pull it all the way tight. And as long as we dry this correctly and the rawhide isn't too old, which I don't think it is, we should be good. But kind of in an ideal world, I'd have it a little bit tighter, I suppose. I also failed to mention in the last video tape. Tape works great. Electrical tape is good. Duct tape is probably more functional because it has all these fibers in it, and so it's less stretchy, but when it ages it turns into some horrible ossified material that is really hard to deal with. So I would recommend using that black electrical tape instead. A lot quicker than this if you're predisposed to quick fixes and you don't care what stuff looks like and don't care if you can make it yourself and all that. Tape definitely works. Okay, as you can see, we ended up with some extra here. Probably what happened is that this side just stretched out as we were sewing, but it doesn't really matter what happened as long as we just trim it how we want it. To finish this seam up, I'm not actually going to even really tie it off. I'm just going to come in right here one more time and then way up inside the seam and then try to come out through the seam itself. There we go, right there. And since everything's going to dry hard, including the sinew, it's not going anywhere. You know, that's fine. So now I can just get that as tight as I want it, cut it off. Everything's hidden. There's no knots showing, no loose threads. Trim this up nice and clean. Let's look at what we got here. Our fit up here is great, no problem there. As it kind of, before I let it dry all the way, and I might check it part way in between, I'll come in and kind of tuck everything exactly where I want it and hope it stays. You can see there's these little bits of jelly from the hide glue sticking out. We'll just clean those off. It fits a little looser than I'd like, I'd say overall, but especially up here, but I think it's going to be fine. I might make a little more effort next time to get that better. This extra glue down here, we can just clean up with water. Easier to do now than later. So another thing is I don't want this to be square like that because, you know, it forms a bump. So that can be trimmed off like that, but it's going to be easier later. Like right now it's just too squishy. So once it's about half dry, I can do that, or I can wait till it's all the way dry and do it, or I can also work on sanding it a little bit. But everything else looks pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some hot water. Again, not too hot for my hand, but really hot, because I want it to heat through this rawhide all the way through and then soften and liquefy the glue underneath there. That glue is going to just flow all evenly underneath here. Okay, I got my water hot. It got a little too hot, so I just added some more cold water, but I can keep my hand in there now. So I'm just going to pour that on until it heats its way right through that rawhide and liquefies the glue underneath. And how do I know that happened? Well, I don't. I'm just going to use a lot of water and assume it's good. Just get this all dried off. Make sure all this is molded just exactly where I want it. Alright, so it's all ready to dry. I got the wood stove cranked up. I think that's a better option since the sun's going to go down pretty soon and it's winter, so the sun's kind of weak anyway. This turned out, you know, it's a little thicker than I want, but it's definitely going to shrink in thickness a little bit. If I'm really lucky, it'll shrink to half the thickness, but I don't think it's going to be quite that much. Deer rawhide is probably a pretty good choice overall. It varies in thickness a lot, but you know, a lot of the skin would be about the right thickness. We want to dry this quickly. The faster rawhide dries, the more it shrinks. Okay, we're partially dry now. There's definitely a little more firmness here, and I'm just gonna take and tap on the seam. This is a trick you use with sewing with sinew, like with making buckskin clothing. Once the seam is all sewn, you can pound on it. Yeah, that's a little flatter. It's not going to get perfectly flat, but definitely better. See how it's like bending up? It's not shrunk enough yet to be doing that.